medicines. Is Manka here? Well, I can't see. Oh, there you go, Manka, right. So obviously, we talked a lot about the infrastructure, about finances, and our big, of course, problem for us is the medicines and drugs and how we manage that. We know hospitals are going from care into the community, and we're empowering our patients more, etc. And so Manka is going to lead a panel on discussing that whole transition and looking at medicine optimization and going into the community. Manka, as an advisor to us on Giant, has been enthusiastically working with us last year to build this event today with her enthusiasm. Thank you so much for that, Manka. Manka is the Chief Pharmacist at Norfolk and Suffolk Foundation Trust. Is that right? Manka, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
I will leave this here as well.
Thank you very much, everyone. Fantastic. It's an absolute pleasure to be introducing Medicines Optimisation today at the Future Hospital Show in the Giant Health Conference for 2025. When I was asked to lead this session, I immediately knew who the trailblazers and role models in pharmacy are. Hence, I've assembled the Avengers. This exceptional panel are leaders who have taken medicines optimization direct to patient care, from regulatory changes to the frontline pathway redesign. It's a true example of patient-centered care. All three leaders have been instrumental to my journey to lead medicines optimization, where I have been recognized by CQC as a capable, compassionate, and inclusive leader. And I'm going to have my fangirl moment. So David here is the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer for England, and he taught me how to be an inclusive leader. He taught me not to follow the herd and the importance of diversity to lead medicines optimization. And he's someone who's influencing strategy and policy. I've got Satiris over there, who taught me how to be a capable leader. He taught me to ask for forgiveness and not permission when you're doing the right thing. And he's been demonstrating what good looks like in the front line. And in the middle, I've got Eric, who's a dear colleague of mine and has taught me how to be a compassionate leader and be brave. And you have a duty to do what's right. And to me, that translates as rules are meant to be broken. So I'm going to start with a patient voice note on what this means to the people we serve.
The chemistry of healing, a personal perspective. Just a short note for readers. This reflection touches on the experience of witnessing a fatal accident and its long-term psychological effects. So please read at your own pace and with care for yourself. This reflection was written to capture a moment of understanding, when lived experience and scientific awareness finally met. It describes the point at which I began to recognise that trauma is not just an event stored in memory, but a chemistry lived within the body. Through the process of the EMDR and the gradual unravelling of long-buried memories, I came to see that healing too is chemical, and that it can be guided through awareness, connection and care. So I offer this not as a clinical account, but as a lived one, a bridge between what patients live and what very often clinicians strive to understand. So if this piece helps even one conversation move from procedure to partnership, or one listener to realise that the body's signals are not weakness, but communication, then I hope it has done its work. Eric Crossfield. The chemistry of healing. Having received a diagnosis of complex PTSD some 42 years after something dreadful had happened, I found myself wanting to understand what on earth was happening to me. I had no idea how or why my mind and body seemed to react as they did. but I was willing to ask for help and to learn. I wanted to learn. I wanted to know whether I was simply failing somehow, or whether there was something deeper that I could discover. For the first time, I began to see that certain memories still lived on, not only in my mind, but also in my body, carried and communicated through the very chemistry that connects the two. That something dreadful that I mentioned began when, at just 18 years old, in my second decade, I witnessed the scene of a helicopter crash that only moments before had been carrying not only the pilot, but also 3 of my classmates and fellow trainee officers. I saw what no one should ever have to see. My 3 friends losing their lives in a most unpleasant way. It was only 3 months to the day after we had proudly joined the Royal Navy at Britannia Royal Naval College in Dartmouth. My brain did what it had to do to protect me, to survive what it could not comprehend, locking away the unbearable while somehow keeping me functional and helping to extinguish the fires. At the funeral that followed a few days later, I served as a pallbearer and carried the coffin of one of those friends, John. I remember the solemnity of the occasion, the physical strain of the weight, and the instinctive composure drilled into us as young officers. What I didn't recognise then was that part of that day and of that earlier horror never left me. During the EMDR treatment session, that memory surfaced with startling force. I suddenly felt a crushing weight on my right shoulder, the same shoulder that had borne the coffin all those years ago, those decades before. It wasn't symbolic, it was physical, chemical, cellular. My body was remembering what my mind had suppressed. In that instant, I understood that memory isn't stored only as images or words. It's recorded in chemistry, in the very hormones, neurotransmitters, and electrical currents that once reacted to the original event. Each repetition of fear, grief, or restraint had left a chemical trace. The body had kept its own logbook of survival, written not in sentences but in molecules. That was the moment when I realized that Bessel van der Kolk's phrase and book, "The Body Keeps the Score," became reality for me. Trauma, I realized, isn't just remembered, it is stored, woven into the body's chemistry and neural pathways. And that understanding opened a new kind of awareness. If trauma could imprint itself through chemistry, through the alarm signals once fired by my amygdala, then surely healing too could emerge through chemistry, as those same pathways learned new patterns of calm and connection. I began to see that I am not separate from those processes, I am them. The neurotransmitters, hormones, and molecular rhythms of my body are not abstract reactions, they are me, living and responding. From that moment, medicine's optimization became something personal. It was no longer a clinical exercise performed by others, it became a shared responsibility, the stewardship of my own inner chemistry. Medicines, fluoxetine and others, nutrition, rest, movement, connection, and purpose are all part of that same continuum. Understanding that restored a vital sense of ownership. While trauma had left its mark within me, I realized I could work with my body systems, guiding them toward balance rather than simply surviving their reactions. That moment, born from unbearable memory, marks the beginning of my own post-traumatic growth. The quiet recognition that even after decades, now in my 7th and now 8th decade, The body that keeps the score can also learn the steps of healing, and in doing so, bring the mind gently back into harmony with it.
Thank you very much for playing that voice note. Thank you. I think that's a reminder why we're all here. And I'm going to go to David first. David, if you can introduce yourself, and if you can kindly remind us what is it that we're doing at national level with the 10-year health plan that is going to take care directly to our patients and service users in our front line.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Wow, excellent. That was a sort of encouragement to participate. So, morning, everyone. Oh, brilliant. And thank you, Eric, for sharing that with us, because there's something really important, isn't it? Particularly when we're thinking about medicines, it's not only effectiveness and outcome that matters, but it's also about the experience of taking medicines. And I think, to me, that's the focus of medicines optimization. So Manka said she immediately thought of the three people she wanted to join her on this panel. Unfortunately, she could only get one of them, which is Eric, and Satiris and I are filling in for the other people who couldn't be here. But genuinely, a real pleasure to be with you. And it's a time, there's a bit of a paradox at the moment for us, those of us who work in the health service and the patients that we serve, that there's quite an amount of uncertainty at the moment about how we're going to organise ourselves, what care is going to look like in the future. And yet we also glimpse a significant opportunity to do things better. And there's this sort of position of equilibrium between those two thoughts. And I was thinking about, well, you know, it's our own tale of two cities, in a sense, as we work through all of this. And I think it is fair to say it's an age of wisdom, but it's also an age of influences. It's an epoch of science, but it's also an epoch of incredulity. And we're facing into a sort of a winter of pressure, and yet we can see the sort of opportunity that spring's going to bring. And I think in all of that, what we need is the sort of Polaris, the North Star that's going to help us navigate through all of this. And for me, that's the 10-year health plan. That is our North Star in all of this. And then there's another document that follows it up called the Medium-Term Planning Framework, which I know sounds really enticing, but that's the itinerary for the next 3 years. So we've got the navigation and we've got the itinerary. And I think there's a few, if time's with us, Manka, there's a few things I'd like to call out from the medium-term planning framework in particular. So hospital to community, or at least closer to the community where people live, is a really important theme. I think top of the agenda in that is how medicines optimization will play in neighbourhood settings, and that's something that we're giving a lot of thought to at the moment. You'll be aware that there are the 43 pathfinders or implementation sites, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to think about how is it that patients will access their medicines, how will those services be provided, what's the outcome that we're looking for through all of that. In terms of sickness to prevention, this is a huge area. I think Satiris is going to major on this, so I'm going to keep going and spoil his speech, actually, for that. There's lots of ways of looking at prevention. So we can make it really, really complicated, because we can start to think about how do we segment it. Is it primordial prevention, which is a sort of government responsibility? Is it primary prevention before illness starts? Is it secondary once illness has started? Is it tertiary, even, where we're trying to sort of arrest further progression? The problem with spending a lot of time on definitions is that they all overlap to an extent, and it becomes very hard to place one thing in one category or another. I prefer the Chief Medical Officer's definition, which is in a publication from a couple of years ago called Health in an Aging Society. And that says primary prevention is the arena of governments, and secondary prevention is everything that the health service tries to do. And I think once we capture it in that way, it makes it easier to formulate, and we can start to see all sorts of interventions with medicines in the context of ultimately being preventative, because they stop something else happening further down the line. And then the last one to focus on, I think, is the analog to digital shift. And in the context of medicines, there are some things that I think that are particularly important. So you'll pick up there's a real theme about majoring on the NHS app as the sort of portal into everything in the future. I think that's something that we need to stay focused on. There's the reality of data in terms of medicines is that actually primary care data has been solid and excellent for some time. And those of us who work in secondary care are starting to catch up, really, with open platforms for data, moving away from consumption. All we can measure in many settings is consumption, as opposed to being able to link it to a patient history. And so that, I think, is a place we want to get to. And if you get into the weeds of the medium-term planning framework, it'll talk very much about onboarding people with the federated data platform. That, I think, is a significant thing to watch out for in the future. And then the last things are a bit more about exploiting AI in the context of big data, and even more sort of pragmatic things like ambient voice technology and how we use those in patient care. So I think just to round out before, are we going to Soteris? Just to round out, I think in this sort of tale of two cities, we have done some important things with medicines, and in pharmacy services, we've really started to push the envelope. Clinical services delivered through community pharmacy in particular, which we haven't really seen before we introduced Pharmacy First, and now we've got the independent prescribing pathfinders, and they need to then be located in the neighbourhood health context. That's been good, and we're going to keep pushing with that. But the other thing is just the evolution of medicines as an intervention and the science that lies behind that. And I'd really encourage you to think about the role that genomics is going to play. Because once we know, from a genetic point of view, which patients are going to benefit from an intervention, we can be much more precise in whom we offer that intervention to, as opposed to a more population-based approach where we expose large numbers of people without being really certain which are the individuals who are going to gain maximum benefit. So that's the precision medicine side. And then on the pharmacogenetic side, understanding how people are going to respond to the medicine they've been given in terms of are they going to be extremely sensitive, or are they going to be able to sort of metabolize it. That, I think, creates huge opportunity too. So a period of uncertainty at the moment, but huge opportunity ahead.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Soteris. Soteris, you are someone who has taught me ask for forgiveness, not permission, and you've been an incredible trailblazer in the world of pharmacy. Can you just introduce yourself, who you are, the various roles you have, and some of the work you've been doing?
Yeah, I'm not sure I like the focus of everything that bad happens and that you have to ask for forgiveness revolves around me, but we are where we are. So really nice to meet everyone today. My name is Soteris Antonio. By background, I was historically a consultant pharmacist, and we'll touch on a bit around that, and then moved on to become an associate director of pharmacy at St Bartholomew's Hospital, and now a divisional director at St Bartholomew's Hospital. And I keep mentioning St Bart's, and that's really because it's a specialist cardiovascular and cancer centre. And so, we often talk about great care. We've got a beautiful building. And as a consultant pharmacist, it always deemed that when patients come in, we're given great, fantastic care. But we also recognise that that's the tip of the iceberg. The vast majority of these people living with cardiovascular conditions are out in the community. And so it dawned on us a good decade ago around what can we do to support. And I think the real change for us happened very much around, it was a 5-year forward view, and then you had a subsequent GP practice forward planning or forward view that talked about the introduction of GP practice-based pharmacists. Because what we were doing is we recognised that St Bart's is based in northeast London and actually had a high level of health inequalities, social deprivation, and perhaps unsurprisingly, when you look at the mortality and break it down based on the deciles of social deprivation, those core 20% have the highest mortality, age-adjusted, related to circulatory conditions. And there's a number of factors related to that. And so what we try to do in northeast London is when you look at the GP performance for cardiovascular conditions, there were a majority in the bottom 10%. And we said, look, what can we do to support? So we worked with our GP partners. And at the time, there was a big focus on stroke prevention and atrial fibrillation and how we can improve anticoagulation. So we worked with our GPs. And then with the introduction of GP practice-based pharmacists, we saw a better management of a sustainable management around how we can support primary care to identify, hopefully, and prevent hospital admissions of the future. And that's really because of the increasing population across northeast London that suggests by 2030 we need a whole new district general hospital in order to accommodate that. And that's clearly unsustainable. So it's good to see the 10-year plan focus a lot more around prevention and what we can do to hospital to community. So we've done a lot of work working with our GP practice-based pharmacists. And then, we're talking here about a future hospital and what that means. And for me, that very much is not a building. It's a clinical hub working with a network of people, and that includes all aspects of primary care. And that primary care isn't just GPs, but also community pharmacists. And we've got an opportunity now with digital technology to act as an enabler, all aligned with the 10-year plan. And so we've been doing a lot of work with our GP practice-based pharmacists, but the sickness to prevention gives us that scope to think about what else we can do. And we've often known years and years about community pharmacists and how 99% of the population lives within 20 minutes. And so we looked at this and thought about the core 20% population and then approached community pharmacies in those core 20% areas and now looking at how we can support them around enabling prevention to reduce the workload and the pressures on GPs in particular. And so we know that historically, nationally, they get commissioned in order to do opportunistic blood pressure checks. But we often hear about the GPs adding on workloads and having to refer for a blood test in order to get a cholesterol breakdown that will give them something called a Q risk assessment, which gives us the cardiovascular, the risk of having a heart attack and a stroke in the next 10 years. So we thought, why can't we introduce that to community pharmacies by doing a point-of-care testing? And I'll have to be honest, if I was to do it all again, I wouldn't do it. And that's really because of the level of bureaucracy, process, and everything else. And we do not make things difficult for ourselves. So all credit to innovators that think we're doing it, but we wanted to introduce a point-of-care test that actually meets all the due diligence and the governance. What we didn't want is for them to do a test in a community pharmacy that requires duplication by the GP. So we needed to ensure the governance arrangements were in place, and we've now got that in place. In that, when they have their test, gives you a full breakdown, comes with an automatic score of their heart risk score, and it doesn't require duplication. And in particular, we focus on those core 20%, which our data tells us they don't routinely access the traditional mechanisms within primary care. The biggest enabler without this is, by fact, is digital technology. So the information, as David's alluded to, feeds into the NHS app, so it gives patients some ownership of their results. But it also feeds automatically to the GP system, so they're kept informed of the process, again, reducing that duplication. And now we're taking it a step further, thinking about primary prevention, but actually there's a number of patients that we see in the hospital, and we give people more and more complex medicines, but it means that often these patients have to get 2 or 3 buses to come back and see me in clinic for me to then optimize their medicines further. So we're now looking at that and thinking about how can we facilitate that with, say, community pharmacists in order to do point-of-care testing, where we're getting patients initiated on their medicines in the hospital, and now, with their permission and care closer to home, enabling them to have their cholesterol test, but also some of their medicines optimized and David may wish to touch upon about the future developments around pharmacists all becoming, by September 2026, independent prescribers. And from a patient's perspective, we know that what they want is somebody who's competent. They don't care if it's a doctor, nurse, physiotherapist, or a pharmacist. They just want somebody who's competent, which is what we would all want to see. If you're seeing a healthcare professional, you want them to be competent. And so pleasingly, we've introduced some competency-based assessments to make sure that the information comes in. But the beauty of us managing that through this networked approach is the accountability still sits with the specialist centre. And it's perhaps unsurprisingly, some of our early data shows that when somebody has a heart attack, they were not optimized on their medicines once they got released back into primary care. I say released because everyone wants to be under the hospital banner. And they were not accepting GPs to optimize their medicines. So what we've done now is, under the banner of Bart's Heart Centre, enabling community pharmacies to optimize with the accountability and the oversight from the hospital. So the digital transformation is huge in its enabling us to do care closer to home, with the oversight and the support mechanisms and the accountability of the hospital. And that's where I think this future hospital model is not that physical building. It's going to be that central hub of specialist knowledge with a network enabling that to ensure that patients can receive treatment closer to home, but with that oversight of the specialist hospital. And that's going to reduce so much pressure on both the hospital systems, but also providing that support amongst the wider primary care. But for me, we need to stop focused on drugs themselves, but think about where do they fit within the clinical pathway. And that's what's driven me towards community pharmacy, because you might see the consultant, you then see your GP, but actually they pick up their medicines from the community pharmacy. And we probably don't do enough around supporting people with adherence, but there's an opportunity now with digital technology and this networked approach to bring everyone together in order to focus around the patient, but also thinking about how we can prevent those people from getting admitted into hospital in the first instance, which, you know, as the first chair who opened the session highlighted that 90% of the funds flow into the hospital. And that's dramatically changing. We're hearing that now. And so as a result, there's a much better appetite from secondary or tertiary services thinking about how they can support primary care better. So if nothing else, this integration and working across boundaries is an exciting time and a huge opportunity for us to really focus around how we can support people with certain long-term conditions.
Thank you, Satiris. That's beautifully put. I think hearing from David and hearing from Satiris, we can see what's happening at national and how you're taking it into the front line. But you talked about the patient voice and trust, and I think that's incredibly, you know, that's the key thing here, trust. Do our people trust us to provide the service? And I'm going to go to Eric now. Eric, I can't thank you enough for that beautiful voice note. It took a lot for you to do that for me. Thank you so much for sharing. Not only is Eric my deputy lead governor, but I'm going to allow Eric to introduce himself.
Thank you, Micah. I had a really bad cold at the weekend, and so now my voice has just gone haywire. Is there a pharmacist in the house by any chance? Sorry. I was in the Royal Navy. I was a Cold War nuclear submariner navigator. Navigation was my specialization. I did have a command of a training ship. So the helicopter accident, a crash that you heard about earlier was just part of the training. A lot of people talk about events, trauma happening in combat. This was in training. And so I was in the other helicopter at the time, thinking I was going to have a fantastic time. And the first thing I heard when I put my helmet on was crash, crash, crash. And then all the rest happened. I am, as Micah has said, Deputy Lead Governor at NSFT. NSFT is a mental health trust and is one of the areas that I like to give back. Having discovered a lot of my own trauma and my own treatment, I do have a diagnosis of complex PTSD, which I nowadays call complex PTSE. I've shifted the disorder to experience because as part of the post-traumatic growth, it has now become an understanding of what that really was. I'm also on the patient public voice group for NHS England Armed Forces team, where I have helped to significantly to co-produce Op Courage, which is the Veterans Mental Health and Wellbeing Service. So excuse me relying on notes and my phone, none of which is working particularly well. Do you want a particular question to be asked?
Eric, I do. And we have spoken about some of these questions, and they're very sensitive, because I think it's important that we understand the journey the people we serve go through. Eric, how did you feel when you said that, when you developed that voice note for me?
Developing the voice note itself was part of the long healing process, a really long healing process. The feeling I got as I came to the conclusion and thought, yeah, I think I've got the words about right, was satisfaction. But the feeling during the process of discovery, my personal discovery, whether it's right for others or not, it doesn't matter. It was right for me. That trauma was recorded in my body over a very, very long time, and therefore a recognition, because I like patterns. I'm quite a good pattern recognizer, and I like to see sort of evidence that tells me enough that I can then work with. That notion that, okay, this trauma isn't that I was wrong or I was, or anything to do with character or madness or fate, but it was actually my body and particularly the amygdala in my brain saving me, keeping me sufficiently alive at a time. It's quite extraordinary what I've learnt about that process. But when I realised, particularly when the weight came on, and it really was a really heavy sort of pushing weight on my right shoulder as I was going through the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing process, I thought, okay, if that's captured in my body over that length of time, then this is about the molecules. It is about the biochemistry and the electrochemical, and therefore the feeling was relief, because I got a sufficient understanding that was good enough for me, technically right or wrong, it didn't matter. It was technically good enough for me. That huge relief that I could actually deal with that and do something about it, and think, okay, that means I wasn't wrong, but I can understand what that might be. And that has developed also, if I may, Manka, into a further thought that it had to have me doing it, but it was also the pharmacology there to help to stabilize the fluoxetine to modulate, and even simply thiamine to just make my brain work a bit better, and the psychology as well. Those three legs of the stool, pharmacology, psychology, and the lived experience, was holding my little three-legged stool up, my three-legged milking stool. And I noticed, I had a bit of a sort of thought when I was going through this, that if say that's the seat of the stool, and you take one of those three legs away, it will always fall in the direction of the need. It will fall in the direction of the lived experience, or in the direction of the pharmacology, or in the direction of the psychology. They cannot work other than together, or indeed, rather than psychology, it might be cardiology. So, I think it works really well. And of course, if you ever add a fourth leg, then it always tries to find the three best legs.
Absolutely. Eric, you spoke about medicines optimization is personal. You said medicines optimization is no longer a clinical exercise performed by others. You said it's a shared responsibility, stewardship, understanding, and ownership.
Yeah, I think it is that notion of shared stewardship. I couldn't possibly do it on my own. I know people who are no longer here because they tried to do it on their own. And that's just unfair on themselves, because we tend to put an awful lot of weight on ourselves. But if one can find a way to share the ownership, and that's what happened when I got that. If I can answer it in this way, with PTSD and complex PTSD, which is usually, the complex is usually a series of events that individually might be trauma, but collectively, and then cumulatively might turn into complex PTSD. Very often, the word hope is at the heart of this. And there is a point at which people are without hope at all. It is hopeless. It doesn't then turn immediately to hopefulness. It's not, you're not full of hope. But what happened to me at that point when I realized, this is chemical. It's not me being bad or broken. This is chemical. That gave me, it didn't even give me hope, but it gave me an acknowledgement that there was a possibility of hope. And that possibility of hope was a glimmer, enough of a glimmer to, for me to bring back the old Eric and start to work on it.
Thank you, Eric. I've got another thought, actually. You talk about value of your experience, benefit of designing pathway. I want to just quickly share, when I went into one of the most challenged organisations in the country, I had to recruit my senior leadership team because it wasn't diverse, it was very gender biased. So I invited Eric to be on my interview panel. And for a very critical post, which is a medicine safety officer, we interviewed 4 times. We had a wealth of candidates. They all answered the questions well. But Eric's gut feeling said, I'm not sure. Eric said to me before we started the interviews, Manka, I know nothing about pharmacy. And I said, well, Eric, you know what it feels like to receive care. And I need you to tell me, would you trust this person to provide care to you? And it comes from, do you want to just share some of that? Because I realize now Eric is fantastic at recognizing patterns, and that comes from his job as a submarine navigator. But do you want to talk about that experience, how you helped me develop a diverse cultural workforce?
I think what I often do, I've done about 90 panel interviews or interview panels at NSFT. So I've started to get to think that I can do it, but I perhaps bring something which isn't always there on a panel. And what I'm particularly looking at is how will a patient experience this person if they were in front of them? Will they be re-triggered like I am with those 2 bright lights at the moment up there? It's all right, I'm not. But I did think about it earlier on, because in a submarine I'm in black lighting and red lighting most of the time. But I also wanted to know, and I'm not sure if this is answering your question actually, Manka, but I also wanted to think, what about not just this person for this job, but what about the team that he or she is working in? What about the future direction of that team? And can they take that really important role of medicine safety officer into a new direction, particularly for NSFT, because we are going through a lot of really positive changes after some difficult years. So I really wanted to look to the future for those roles, as well as whether they could work with individual patients.
Thank you, Eric. I'm going to ask the panel very quickly. I'm going to ask David very quickly. We've got 5 minutes left. What's the key message you want to put out there?
The key message. Thank you, Manka. So the key message I'd like everybody to go home with is this sort of duality of recognizing it's tough at the moment, recognizing the challenges that our patients face and that our colleagues face in trying to look after them, but also holding on to that opportunity and the vision and the excitement that is framed through the things that I was talking about earlier. And the two things that give me great hope, really, are some of the innovation that will underpin a much more collaborative environment for working. So I think things like the single patient record will be a game changer, because then we're not transferring bits of information. I would think our patients most of the time think that we can all see each other's records anyway, so it's always a bit of a sort of aha moment for everybody when that's not the case. That, I think, is very important, because once we do that, we get into much more collaborative models of healthcare. And it's something Satiris said that they've been working on in East London, is not just, if you like, generating more activity for other people, but finding a health need and then addressing it. And you can do that in a collaborative way when you can share all the information about what you're contributing. So that's what I'd hope people will take away.
Thank you, David. Satiris, this question's for you. How do we keep going and not give up?
So I mentioned at the very start, if I was to do this again, I perhaps wouldn't. I think the reason why we have gone through it is, you can talk about resilience, but I think the point that David's come to is about collaboration. And I often tell people within my team that a percentage of nothing is nothing. So we're happy to work with anyone who's got the same agenda, same priority. So within our, if you take the point of care testing collaboration, it's across North East London, but across the North Central London. And we've got the ICBs buying, we've got the voluntary organisations, so Heart UK and Diabetes UK. So that's also representing the patient voice, but making sure we brought them in early as part of the steering committee to make sure the direction. We've also got the pathology teams involved, and we've got those involved in cardiovascular prevention to help guide us to do that, as well as the GPs themselves. So, and lastly, of course, obviously the community pharmacists. So if you are to do something that you think is going to be innovative, and I know every single person in the audience has an idea of what they want to do, the challenge is how do we deliver that and move that forward? And that's about getting the right people and like-minded individuals, because there will always be a little bump across the road that somebody else has to take over and just give you those momentum or kind words just to keep going with the direction of travel in order to overcome and move things forward. And dare I say, it makes it more worthwhile when you've overcome those bumps along the road. So I think the key message that I would like for the group is more about, if you are thinking about doing something along the 10-year lines, think about what's the potential collaboration, and don't forget the voluntary organisation. And I sort of suggested that the future hospitals is not a building, it's going to be a clinical hub with a specialist and a network of people.
Thank you, Stu.
But equally within that is the voluntary organisations.
Thank you. And very quickly, Eric, you keep telling us to keep striving to be right. How do we do that? How do we get more Erics in the work we're doing?
How do we keep striving to right? Well, I would say, obviously, there's a great deal of talk, and rightly so, about greater patient participation, and by that I also mean carers and families as well as service users. But I would say involve patients early. Don't wait for them for you to deliver the service and then ask for feedback afterwards. If you ask early on, and it's hard, it's really hard, and it's probably really scary to ask patients. I completely get it, because there's a degree of loss of control. But ask early, and the question is not what should we do, but what can we do better based on your experience.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you to David, thank you, Satiris, and thank you, Eric. You've been fantastic, and thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you, Manka. Thank you so much. Thank you, Manka. Well done. Lovely. Thank you. David, thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks. Absolutely, yeah, thank you. Great, thank you so much for a wonderful panel discussion. Thank you for Eric for sharing your human story. That's really valuable. I mean, Manka mentioned the voice note a few weeks ago to me saying, can we share a voice note from a patient? And one of the things I mentioned at the beginning of this day was that we really want to give a patient voice. Much more of a standing in our conference. As I mentioned before, wherever you go, we almost lose the patient voice entirely. We talk about innovation tech, it's very healthcare orientated. So thank you for that, sharing your human story and with us as an audience. We really value this. So we'll move on to our next speaker. And it's Mr. Raju Ramesh. And so again, it's a theme of patience, I guess, as we move forward. Raju is from Torbay Hospital, is that right? Orthopedic surgeon. And he has the Torbay charts, which is downstairs, right? Which you tell us all about in a second. But how do we, I guess the question